So I'd like to invite Mayor Carroll for our next presentation. Thank you.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko te aroha, te maunga, ko te waiho, te awa, ko Carroll, te iwi, ko Mia toko ingoa, ngā mihi nui, kia koutou. I want to start by acknowledging the whakatauki that's up on the screen. It's already been up once this morning, which is fantastic. This is the whakatauki that underpins my postgraduate program, which I've been teaching at Auckland University for 16 years now. Of course, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It's people, it's people, it's people. Now, I don't know how to use this thing. Oh, there we go. One of the other fundamental phrases that's buried in my course is every single interaction that we have in healthcare heals or harms. That's from your very resting face to the kinds of conversations that we have. And that's an extraordinarily powerful thing. And the stories that I've learned over the time that I've taught this course delineate between healthcare professionals who are magic and those who are menace. And the magics are those that listen, create safe spaces for us to be, help us to feel safe, create relationships with us where we felt we mattered. They cared for us as people. They were interested in us beyond our disease. They celebrated, this is a particular man, Alan Ormrod, they celebrated Ormie's life and they were on Team Ormie. They were there for us in a scary world we didn't understand. They healed. The real magic nurses healed past bad experiences that people had endured. And I'm mindful of the fact that to lose compassion, I think we lose what it is to be human. So my argument to you today is that we need a person-centered collaborative care approach, and minimally disruptive medicine is very much part of that. In preparation for this, I talked to lots of people, lots of patients and lots of staff. And our people living with long-term conditions talk about the fact that actually we don't acknowledge that from one day to the next, their lives are dramatically different. A diagnosis is normalised in healthcare. We think nothing of telling somebody that they have diabetes. They actually experience extraordinary grief and loss for the life that they had yesterday. I have two sisters just recently diagnosed with cancer, one with gallbladder cancer and one with breast cancer. And I am watching them struggle to integrate this news in an incredibly challenging way. So, you know, our people living with long-term conditions, and I say living with long-term conditions, because if you use the word chronic in my class, you get a D, right? It's one of the things that happens. So it's living with long-term conditions. But they talk about feeling like they have absolutely no choice. They talk about people telling them to toughen up. They talk about the fact that the dream that they had yesterday is no longer today. They talk about the emotional costs that nobody recognises. The feeling of despair, the feeling of I won't be here for my children, the feeling of will I be able to handle this? How will I navigate that system when my last experience of it was so horrendous? They also talk about the cultural costs. This was a particular client who was living with end-stage renal failure on dialysis, and she talked of the fact that she really wanted to be there with her whānau. She didn't want to burden them with her life. She really didn't want to not be able to attend all the things that really mattered to her. Caught in a bind around that. They also talked endlessly about the opportunity costs. On a benefit and what they pay for and what they choose, food over treatments, getting to clinic appointments and rent. You know this, it's been up this morning already. Time for monitoring and all those things that we ask them to do, or time for paid work. We know that people living with long-term conditions can spend up to 8 hours a day if they're doing everything that we direct them to. It's a hell of a lot of work, right? Hell of a lot of work. And it can be that 10-hour day. Again, I think focused on my illnesses or living the role that I want to live is the key question here. One of the clients I interviewed on dialysis said, Mia, I feel like I'm in prison. I absolutely have no choice. I have no autonomy whatsoever. If I don't do this, I'm dead. If I don't do what they say, I have to be very careful how I phrase it, otherwise they get angry with me and God knows what will happen then. His losses I need to just share with you because they're quite poignant for me. This is one man's losses on dialysis. But when you look at the level of loss, and that's only the half of it, right? That's only the half of it. The next half goes like this. loss of role in life, loss of partner, loss of holidays, loss of farm, loss of the small home, threat of the rest home, loss of independence, the final straw was the loss of his driver's licence. His only goal in life was to get to Rugger every Saturday with his grandchildren. And because of that loss of licence, he had no way of doing it. Now, as a nurse, my heart ached. I live in New Plymouth. There would be thousands of people who would volunteer to get that man to Rugger on a Saturday. Where could I activate that? I don't know if you know, but there's a new app called My Care New Zealand, where you can actually go in and find your region and find people. It might be a paid service, but I looked it up in Taranaki and found somebody who would be very happy to drive him to rugby every time. So it's a hell of a lot of loss, and I guess that leads me to the next point of the fact that we've normalised these losses means that we have a raft of people with undiagnosed anxiety and depression. And that seems really, really cruel to me. Now, Northland embarked on an experience to find a little bit more about what people thought in the North. And so they asked people about their experiences. And it won't surprise you, I'm really sorry I missed yesterday, but it won't surprise you to know that the things that bothered them the most were institutional racism. Things that bothered them most were poor coordination. They felt like they were just a number. So many people to deal with. I think about people in Auckland who have depression clinic on a Monday, arthritis clinic on a Tuesday, cardiovascular clinic on a Wednesday, and so it goes on. So many providers, so much lack of coordination. And then, of course, in the North, there's the lack of treatment, lack of transport. And it was, I've just come from Northland teaching 25 beautiful postgraduate students, and one of the things that they talk about was their clients tell them that whangarei organise their appointments for 9 o'clock in the morning when they live in Kaitaia. Really helpful indeed. They also talked about affordability, which you know so well, debt cost, and the shame of that, of being called out for their debt publicly in a general practice patient room. Are you going to pay your bill this week, etc., etc., etc. And then, of course, there are the delays to service provision. So what we really see here, I think, is life competing with healthcare. Absolutely, in my view. And, you know, I would really like to choose how I'm going to be treated. Yeah, right. You know, it's a... So now I want to introduce you to an archetypical patient. This is a book that you should all have. Victor Montori is a stunning endocrinologist at the Mayo Clinic who's embarking on starting a revolution. And this is his archetypical John. John's a 55-year-old man. He's overweight. He takes 2 different pills daily. Oh, sorry, I've gone too far, but never mind. He takes 2 different pills daily for his diabetes. He also has hypertension and until recently was using a diuretic, a so-called water pill. Because he was not meeting the target for blood pressure controls set at the practice's contract, his doctor added another tablet, a beta blocker. Now every time John stands up quickly, he becomes dizzy. He also has high cholesterol, depression, a painful lower back, pain in his feet from damage to his nerves caused by his diabetes. Because of his lack of progress in improving any of these conditions, John's primary care clinician referred him to the big medical centre. Her hope was that he would get sorted by the specialist, the podiatrist, and by the dietitian. Note the sorted, like we do too. To attend these appointments, John had to take time off work, convince his neighbour to give him a ride. In these visits, the doctor told him that he needed to do all of these things. Avoid salt, fat, carbs, you need to be active, you need to exercise despite your painful back and feet, and you definitely need to check your feet regularly. But John actually hasn't been able to see his feet for some years, right, because of his rather large belly. The doctors repeatedly admonished him for not taking his pills, assuming this is why he was not making the targets, even though he does take them. This is exactly why he gets dizzy when he stands up too quickly. He didn't get a chance to contradict them. They also told him to check his blood sugars and to log them, and he has been writing down his numbers religiously, bringing them to each appointment. Instead of reviewing the logged numbers, his doctors routinely focused on his HbA1c. In all of these encounters, clinicians only discussed John's HbA1c, cholesterol, blood pressure, and weight. Not a word about John's difficulties with pain, insomnia, or despair. Worries about his job kept John up at night because of layoffs. John was now the only accountant left of 3 the company used to employ. He faced impossible deadlines, and to meet the deadlines, he brought work home. He looked hard at the numbers and found problems. The company and his job were in peril. If he were to lose his job, he'd also lose his ability to pay his debts, his health insurance, and his mortgage. But something about home worried him more than paying his mortgage. John's oldest daughter had come back to live with him. When she showed up at the doorstep, she was seeking refuge from an abusive relationship for her and her 2 daughters. No escape seemed possible, however, from her addiction to painkillers. John was worried sick about his family. Slumped in the living room sofa, he reflected about this and the future of his family and the future of his granddaughters. Dejectedly, he looked at the unopened mail. He noticed a letter from his primary care doctor, opened it, and it was terse. He was not meeting the targets. He should look for a new primary healthcare clinician. Now, we might not fire people, but I think suffice to say, John is a sign. He's a sign of something that's happening within our health systems as well. And I believe that healthcare has become toxic to people like Hone, and it's become toxic for lots of reasons, the first of which is the labelling and the shaming and the language. And yes, language is incredibly important. We constantly label people non-compliant. I call non-compliance medical error, actually. But it's a bit like the miner with the canary. Hone stopped singing, and we have structured non-concordance. Concordance is a totally different idea from compliance. Concordance implies purposeful shared decision-making and negotiation of a path forward, not the telling what to do. And these are more of, I believe, our language of shaming and setting people up to have the most enormous sense of failure. These are words that are used in everyday language by all of our health professionals. And again, the students know that if they use these words, they'll get a D. I'm joking, but I'm not joking. Counties Manukau have a new word for DNA, and it's called failed to inspire. I really like it. You know, frequent flyers are because we've poorly served them in the first place, as Harry Ray would attest when he did ward rounds in people's homes. Again, we label people by their disease, so they become objectified and puzzles for us to sort out. And when they don't comply, we tend to yell at them a little bit louder or put more treatments in the ring for them. We tell them even more strongly what they need to do. And we even sometimes withdraw, and they definitely feel abandoned. It's been my experience in all the time that I've been working with people living with long-term conditions that this beast exists as well. I'm mindful of a young man I met at King's Seat years ago whose grandfather was unemployed, his father was unemployed, so his comment to me was, "Mia, why would I think?" And I see the same with people in their 50s, and we're talking about health, and they say, but my uncle was on dialysis, my auntie was on dialysis, my father was on dialysis. Learned helplessness, learned fatalism, and learned powerlessness is a key part of what we have to tackle when we're working with people who live with long-term conditions. So we have to shift the balance into something that's hope-generating, that believes in them, that believes they are potentially able to change. And what Northland said is we need navigators. We need to give information once. We need to focus on their journey, not we think we should focus on. They do want control. They want alternatives, and they want people to see them in their lives. However, it's a bummer, isn't it? We work in this system. Oh, yeah, right. And it's tough because it's very industrialised. I have a practice in Auckland that has a 6-minute consult. I call it drive-by medicine. What could you do in 6 minutes with a client? I have no idea. Even a 15-minute consult for people living with long-term conditions seems insulting. And when I see bring one problem at a time or make another appointment, my blood boils. So all of this makes it really difficult for clinicians who are impassioned to do the right thing to do the right thing. It's really, really tough. And what happens in that instance is we just burn out, get compassion fatigue, and we withdraw even more. It's cruel to our people, and it's cruel to us. And somebody's got to push back. The tyranny of the urgent is not helping either employees or the people that we're here to serve. Breaks my students, it breaks my heart sometimes with my students. I think all I'm setting them up for is internal dissonance, where I'm saying one thing that they can make the world really right, and they go straight back into that god-awful system that breaks their hearts. Sucks. But anyway, from what it is to what it should be, it really should be from moving some of the things right to actually doing all of the things right. And I love Victor Montori's comment that our care should be elegant and compassionate. We totally need care that's centred by Hone, and this is where minimally disruptive medicine comes in. It's based on the cumulative complexity model, which means that we really have to recognise that people have a real burden of illness and they have a level of capacity to be able to cope with it. And when they're juggling 40,000 professionals and 23 drugs, their capacity is reduced. And the burden of treatment, when you think about what they have from different specialties, that burden of treatment can get really, really big. Now, the team at the Mayo Clinic have developed a tool called the ICAN tool, which is what I wanted to share with you this morning. Just let's say that, again, that burden of treatment and that capacity, the balance between those means that people are either able to access care, use it, or self-manage better, right? So we've got to measure that, which is why I think this tool is powerful. It's not New Zealandised at the moment, and I am quite sure that Casey Boma and Victor Montori would be really happy if we wanted to, that we could New Zealandise this. But it starts off, the client fills this out themselves. I've seen it work. So it asks questions like, what are you doing to manage your stress? Where do you find the most joy in life? What else is on your mind today? Now, it's got a middle bit, but that's the bit you start with as a clinician when they've filled it out. These are the questions that they're asked. Are these areas of your life a source of satisfaction, burden, or both? Friends and family, work or finances. Think about what you're measuring here. This is about if your family and friends are total satisfaction, then you've got increased capacity to cope with whatever the burdens are. If they're not, then you've got less capacity. So it's getting to grips with where should we be focusing this? Where should we be focusing our time and our attention? So it explores that, and then as a clinician, I don't know how to go back. Yes, I do. As a clinician, you start here. Now, what a perfect way to screen for depression or anxiety. That middle question, where do you find the most joy in your life? Nowhere. Well, hell. That's the place to start. I cannot imagine how we expect people to self-manage if they're living with depression and anxiety. It's a misnomer to me, actually. There is theories underpinning this work, and you can have all the evidence you like, including the patient capacity stuff, which looks at how people integrate their illness into their life. It looks at the resources. It looks at the kind of environment they're in. It looks at the amount of work that they're having to do living with their illness. But that's science. If you want more of that, I'm happy to send you all of the literature anytime. I guess I quite like this checklist too, because this is not from the Mayo Clinic, but it's from other places. It's a good help checklist. And one of the things I think I like the most is, are we really power sharing? I talk with my students about communication being tentatively humble. I've taught advanced care planning now for I don't know how many years, and that whole thing of seeking permission and negotiating agendas and power sharing seems fundamental to getting alongside of people living with long-term conditions to make a difference. So have I got that 5-minute thing yet? I'm terrified. Close. Okay, so Victor Montori says it's time that we revolt, and I do hope you get his book. I've sent copies of his book to the Minister of Health, the Prime Minister, Ashley Blomfield, and the chief nurse. And I would suggest that every board member should have a copy of this likewise. I think we have to get people to understand that living with long-term conditions is damned hard work, and the system is absolutely not designed for them right now. So we do need a patient revolution. We need a citizen, this is Victor Montori's work completely, and his permission to share it with you. We are a citizen movement to champion healthcare where stories about your life are welcome. Healthcare that's built on integrity, not ever expanding stupid rules and protocols and policies that prevent people from living the lives they want to. It's healthcare that recognises that being a client, a consumer, a service user, or a patient is hard work. It's healthcare that is for you, not it's like guidelines should be individualised. So, if taking those drugs doesn't suit my life, don't bother prescribing them. Don't bother prescribing them, please. I need to make an informed choice. And I'm gobsmacked about how many people don't get that opportunity. Absolute risk of harm and benefit, numbers needed to treat. That's what I need before I make an informed decision. Not take this pill, but we've got to make that information accessible to them. Healthcare should be, this is Victor, it's his flavour, built on love and solidarity and not greed. So in finishing, I guess what I also want to add, and I've heard that you've got this message very loud and clear yesterday and possibly today, if you don't know what your unconscious biases are, I suggest that you might hop on that website and have a look. You can look at your biases towards older people, disabled people, Indigenous people, you name it, you can find out if you've got any unconscious biases. But I think we need to take the glasses off, and I think we need to call racism at every step of the way because it's so alive and well. And yeah, we really need to call colleagues and the system to account. And this is very, very important to me. I find with people living with long-term conditions, it's time we became hope-generating and not spirit-breaking. My sister died of insulin-dependent diabetes and a hypoglycemic coma, and she would tell me so often she was so sick of failing and being told off. I really want us to have a new breed of people who believe in people, and in particular, give people control over those very precious times of their lives. I want to be in charge of my last 1,000 days, by crikey, and I have got the most defined advanced care plan and advanced directive that you would ever imagine that includes all kinds of stuff that might not be prescribed, but I'm going to Northland for them because I know the green fairy lives in the Hokianga. So I'm inviting you to go to work every day with the perspective of a patient, the spirit of an artist, the heart of a healer, and the courage of a lion. And thank you. I don't know if I've got time for... Poof! Okay. Sorry, it was a run. Fair enough.
You won the award for the best use of by crikey.
Okay.